At my wife's funeral, I arrived 35 minutes late because of an accident on the coastal highway. At the cemetery gate, my daughter-in-law had locked it. She looked through the bars and said, "Go home. Don't stain her final piece with your lateness." I froze watching my wife's coffin descend, while my son avoided my eyes, and my daughter stood as if I didn't exist. Minutes later, a photo of the coffin appeared online with no mention of me. Next morning at the inheritance meeting, I walked in with a brown envelope. When the attorney opened it, their faces went pale. "Before this story unfolds, thank you for being here. That matters more than you know. Drop a comment and tell me what city, what country are you watching from. I'd love to hear it. Note this story contains some fictional elements crafted for entertainment and understanding. Any resemblance to names or places is purely coincidental, but the message carries weight worth holding on to." The accident on Route 1 had looked minor from a distance. 2 cars, a patch of loose gravel, and 35 minutes of my life I was never getting back. I didn't know, sitting behind that slow-moving backup on the Pacific Coast Highway, what those 35 minutes were going to cost me. What I knew was that Eleanor's service had started at 10 o'clock. It was now 10:33. The Carmel Valley Cemetery was 4 minutes south, and I told myself I was going to make it. I didn't, not in the way that mattered. Gate 3 was the entrance closest to Section C, the older part of the cemetery, where the land rolls toward the tree line and the Pacific makes itself heard a mile and a half away. I'd confirmed the location twice the week before. The habit of confirming things had taken root in me 4 years ago, when details were the only thing standing between my wife and catastrophe. The parking lot was half full. I pulled in at an angle, left the door swinging, and moved. The gate was wrought iron black, 8 feet high, the kind that creaks in the salt air, and has been standing here longer than most of the people buried on the other side of it. I'd walked through it 3 times in the past year, checking on the plot Eleanor and I had chosen together back when we still talked about the future. The lock on it now was not the cemetery's lock. Newer, heavier. Stainless steel, still bright in the April sun, the kind you buy at a hardware store, the kind that says, "This is mine, and you are not getting in." Someone had threaded it through the gate latch from the inside. I put my hand on the bars. Through the iron I could see white roses everywhere. Across the casket lid, draped along the folding chairs, cascading in full sprays on either side of Eleanor's plot. She had chosen them herself, 2 years ago, during one of her last clear stretches of time. "White roses," she had said. "Not ivory. There's a difference." I had nodded like I understood, and later looked it up, because Eleanor always meant exactly what she said. The minister's voice reached me through the bars, low measured the practiced cadence of a man who had stood at 100 graves and learned that dignity lives in the rhythm, not the words. I couldn't make out a single line. Just the sound of it, the way grief sounds when it's formal and organized and doesn't belong to you. I became aware of Beatrice before she spoke. She walked to the gate the way she approached everything, with the unhurried certainty of someone who has already decided how a scene ends. At 38, Beatrice Sterling was a corporate transactional attorney, and she wore her black dress the way she wore everything, like a closing argument. She stopped on the far side of the bars and looked at me without surprise. "You're late, Silas." "Beatrice." I kept my voice level. "Open the gate, please. The service is nearly over." She didn't look back at the crowd. "There's no point now. She is my wife." I held her eyes. "Open the gate." Beatrice didn't raise her voice. She never needed to. "Go home. Everything here is finished." A beat. "Your presence now would only disturb her final piece. You've done enough of that." I said nothing. There was nothing in that sentence worth answering. "And tomorrow don't bother coming back for anything." Her voice dropped half a register the way it does when the real meaning surfaces. "We buried her. She is in the ground, without needing a single drop of your late manufactured tears." Something shifted in my chest. Not surprise. Something older than surprise. And she was my wife for 40 years. She was. The word landed like a period. Final, deliberate. And in her own way, she waited for you. She waited 4 years. You still couldn't get here on time. She tilted her head 1 degree. That should tell you everything you need to know about the kind of husband you were. She turned her back and walked away. The lock stayed. Across the grounds near the grave, I found Julian. My son, 42 years old, built like me but softer, where time had been generous. He had seen me the moment I reached the gate. I watched his face process it from 100 feet, watched his feet begin to shift in my direction. Clara's hand found his arm before he completed the turn. My daughter, 36, still and precise, gripped her brother's elbow like a claim. Julian stopped mid-step. He looked at me through the bars and the distance, and all those white roses between us for 3 full seconds. Then Clara leaned close to his ear, and he looked away. Near the foot of Eleanor's grave stood Leo. My grandson, 7 years old, Julian's boy, wearing a small blazer that was a half-size too wide at the shoulders. He held a single white rose in both hands, uncertain who it was for. He'd turned toward the gate at some point. He watched me with the open, uncalculating confusion of a child who cannot yet understand why a grandfather stands outside an iron fence and says nothing. I held his gaze for a moment. Then I made myself look at the casket. At the far edge of the gathering, almost deliberately apart from it, stood Dorothy Gable, my neighbor of 11 years, a retired emergency room nurse who had shown up quietly at my door every Tuesday for 2 years without ever being asked. She was watching me. Not the gate, not the minister, not the crowd. Me. And when our eyes met, she did not look away. She held it with the steadiness of someone keeping a record, making sure you know that at least one person in the world is counting exactly what is being done to you. I stood at that gate for 7 minutes. I counted. The minister's voice shifted pitch, a signal I recognized without being told. The casket crew moved into position. The straps took the weight. The casket lid, white roses and all, began its slow, final descent. I watched Eleanor go into the ground from outside a locked iron gate in the April cold, while the ocean breathed somewhere beyond the tree line. I did not knock. I did not call out. I did not make it a scene. Eleanor would not have wanted a scene. When it was over, I let go of the bars. I hadn't realized how hard I was holding on until I felt how cold they were. I walked back to the parking lot. 3 notifications on my phone waiting. I left them unopened. There was still 1 more day, and I had been preparing for it longer than any of them knew. The house still smelled like antiseptic and lavender, and something beneath both that I could never name until Eleanor was gone. Then I recognized it. It was the smell of someone trying very hard. The hospice company had come that morning before the service, before I'd even knotted my tie and taken everything back. The hospital bed, the IV stand, the rolling tray with the weekly pill organizer I'd refilled every Sunday for 4 years. They were efficient and quiet in the way of people who do this work regularly and have learned not to make it heavier than it already is. By 8 that morning, the room that had been Eleanor's whole world for 18 months looked like a room again. Just a room. Window. Rug. Afternoon light hitting an angle that had never mattered to me before, and now would never stop. I sat at the kitchen table. The brown envelope sat across from me, thick, worn at one corner from handling too many times, sealed with the kind of conviction that builds slowly over 2 years of documentation. I didn't open it. I knew every page by sequence and date. Robert Hargrove, the estate attorney overseeing Eleanor's will and tomorrow's proceedings, would have it in his hands by 9 a.m. Until then, it just had to exist. It was good at that. I had coffee going cold. I had a clock I kept not looking at. At 8, someone knocked. Dorothy Gable stood at the door with a covered dish and the face of a woman who had already decided not to ask how I was doing. 71 years old, 3 decades in emergency medicine. My neighbor since the year I installed the fence along the property line. She knew better than to ask. "Well, I brought food," she said. "Dorothy, you won't eat it. I know." She stepped inside, barely just past the threshold, and handed it over. "Refrigerator. Tomorrow when you get back." She looked at me for a moment. Not at me the way people look when they don't know what to say. At me the way a nurse looks at someone she's been watching for a long time, and finally has something to report. "I saw you at the gate." I set the dish on the counter. "There was nothing I could do, Dorothy." "No." Her voice was careful. "But there was something I could do." "What does that mean?" "It means what it means." "Dorothy, tell me." She looked at me one more second, the look of a woman measuring exactly how much to give. "You'll understand it when it matters," she said. "Get some sleep, Silas." "That's not an answer. It's the one you're getting tonight." She was already at the door. "Tomorrow." The click of the latch was its own kind of sentence. I stood in my kitchen with warm food in my hands, and that half sentence suspended in the air. There was something I could do. And I did. I turned it over for 3 hours and never found the bottom of it. I checked my phone. 2 texts from Julian sent 40 minutes apart. "I'm sorry, Dad. Can we talk?" "Then I know today was hard. Call when you're ready." I set the phone face down. Julian had chosen Beatrice's version of events 3 years ago and built his life around not examining it too closely. 2 texts in one night didn't change the architecture of that choice. I wasn't going to pretend otherwise before I'd even sat down at Hargrove's table. I opened the 3rd notification, Beatrice's Instagram. A photograph of Eleanor's casket, the arrangement caught in afternoon light at exactly the right angle, deliberate, staged, perfect. The caption, saying farewell to the most extraordinary woman I've ever known, surrounded by love exactly as she deserved. 47 comments. I read all of them. Not one mentioned a husband. Not one used the word family in any direction that pointed at me. I closed the app and put the phone on the table. At 10 o'clock, Frank Morrison called. Frank was 68, my roommate at MIT when we were both 20, and certain we were going to build something the world had never seen. He spent the next 35 years instead in estate and trust law in San Francisco, and he was by any measure that meant anything exceptional at it. He'd gone semi-retired 2 years ago, which meant he took the cases that interested him. He'd cleared his schedule for tomorrow the day I called him 2 months ago and told him what I'd been building. "You okay?" he said. "Define okay." "Fair enough." A beat. "The envelope ready 2 months ago." "Good." The sound of him settling back. "Their attorney of record is Gerald Marsh." I waited. "You know that name. Should I?" "In 2019, Frank said, I helped put a man away for estate fraud. Marsh was his counsel. His professional choices during that case caught the California bar's attention for a solid year." A pause. "He kept his license, narrowly, and now he's representing your daughter-in-law in your wife's estate proceeding." Is that a problem? The opposite. The precision in it not gloating something more controlled. Marsh has already shown me who he is. Tomorrow I just need to give him the space to show the room. "Frank." "Sleep. I'll be there at 9. After we hung up, I pulled one page from the envelope. A letter on Monterey Bay Medical Center letterhead, signed by Dr. Nora Okafor, Eleanor's neurologist, for 4 years. 2 paragraphs. A confirmation that Silas Sterling had accompanied Eleanor to all 47 scheduled appointments across 4 years of treatment. Every single one documented, signed by attending staff. I read it once, folded it, put it back. Hargrove would read it in the morning. That was what it was for. I carried the envelope to Eleanor's music room and sat in her chair, the wingback by the window she had claimed the year we moved in and never returned. 12 paintings on the walls, all her own work. Concert halls she had played in when she was someone people traveled to hear. Carnegie Hall, the Royal Albert Hall, Sydney. I hadn't moved a single one. The room was exactly as she had left it. I didn't turn on the light. The moon came off the Pacific, low and silver through the window. Eleanor used to say she could hear the ocean from that chair if the room was quiet enough. I had never been able to. That night I thought I could. She knew they were going to do this. She knew before I did. That was why she planned. I could. And I did. Dorothy's words found me again in the dark, circling, never quite landing. By morning I'd have a theory. By afternoon the theory wouldn't matter, because I was going to watch it happen right there across a table. Driving south on Route 1 the following morning, I passed the spot where everything had gone wrong the day before. The gravel had been swept back. No skid marks, no evidence, nothing that would tell a passing driver what it had cost. I kept my foot on the gas. The Pacific spread wide to my left, the kind of gray-blue that looks like a thought you can't finish. And somewhere between 1 mile marker and the next, I was in October 2019. Dr. Nora Okafor, Eleanor's neurologist at Monterey Bay Medical Center, was 46 years old in that office, precise and unhurried, with the particular composure of a physician who has learned to deliver difficult diagnoses without rushing toward the end of them. She sat across from us with her hands folded over Eleanor's chart, and she looked at me when she spoke, because she had already understood which of us was going to carry what came next. Mr. Sterling, what we're seeing is consistent with early-onset vascular dementia. The rate of progression concerns me significantly. Eleanor sat beside me, hands in her lap, listening the way she listened to things that didn't fully involve her, a kind of gracious attention, polite and slightly distant. She was 61. She had played Carnegie Hall 3 times. She nodded at Dr. Okafor the way you nod when the information is meant for someone else in the room. I walked out to the hospital parking lot and called Julian. Eleanor waited in the car. Salt air off the bay. Afternoon going gray at the edges. "How bad, Dad?" "I'm bad enough that I'm retiring on Friday." Silence. Then, "Dad, there are facilities, professionals who specialize in—" Julian, just his name. He was quiet after that. He understood what it meant, even if understanding it wasn't the same as being ready for it. I drove Eleanor home. We were on Ocean Avenue, stopped at a light when she turned from the passenger window and said, "Did I used to play the piano?" "Your whole career, Ellie. Carnegie Hall, 3 times. She turned back to the window. That was all. No alarm. No grief. Just a fact she was holding up to the light for a moment before setting it back down. The weight of it didn't belong to her anymore. It had transferred cleanly, completely to me. I retired on a Thursday. The paperwork was already filed. 2 weeks later, Julian and Beatrice came to dinner. Eleanor cooked pot roast, her 40-year recipe, but the seasoning was slightly off, and the timing a little long, and she didn't catch either. I set it on the table and didn't say a word. Beatrice sat with the posture of someone who spent her days in boardrooms, straight-backed, measured, cutting her food into careful, precise pieces. She glanced at Eleanor the way you glance at a piece of furniture you're already deciding where to move. Clara, my daughter, 36, thin-shouldered, a model between projects, sat across the table, scrolling her phone beneath the table edge, present enough to be polite and absent enough to make her position clear. "Before you commit to anything permanent, Silas," Beatrice said, "have you considered a formal care assessment? The supplements alongside the prescriptions. I want to make sure Eleanor's getting the most evidence-based care available. Her neurologist designed the entire protocol. I have every prescription in writing." Of course. The smile appeared and disappeared in the space of a breath. "I'm sure you do." What happened next took less than 10 seconds and told me everything. After dinner, while Eleanor was at the sink and Julian had moved to the living room, I walked past the hallway mirror toward the coat closet. Old houses in Carmel have mirrors in unexpected places. This one ran nearly floor to ceiling at the hallway bend, a relic of the original build. In it, without slowing down, I saw Beatrice ease close to Eleanor and drop something small from her wrist into the right pocket of Eleanor's cardigan. A thin gold bracelet. 3 seconds, no hesitation, no look around. I went into the coat closet and stood there with one hand on my jacket and counted to 8. Then I walked into the kitchen, touched Eleanor's arm as I passed her, reached into her pocket, palmed the bracelet, and on my way to the counter dropped it into the open side pocket of Beatrice's handbag. I poured myself a glass of water. I waited. Has anyone seen my bracelet? From the living room. Then Beatrice appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her eyes went to Eleanor first. Silas. Her voice lowered, softened. She's not safe anymore. She's been taking my things. A psychiatric facility might be the more responsible. She didn't take it, Beatrice. I had it when I arrived. It's in your bag, right side pocket. I didn't raise my voice. Maybe you should get your own memory checked. The silence that followed was different from ordinary silence. It was the silence of someone recalculating. She looked at her bag, opened it, found the bracelet exactly where I said it would be. Julian was in the doorway. He had heard all of it. He said nothing. He looked at the floor. Beatrice fastened the bracelet back on without a word and did not look at me for the rest of the evening. Eleanor asked if anyone wanted coffee. That night I understood this wasn't impulsive. It wasn't even about the bracelet. It was a test of Eleanor, of me, of how much she could do before someone pushed back. She had her answer now. What I had was the knowledge that she'd started all of this before Eleanor had been sick 30 days. Julian hugged me at the door on the way out. Call me if anything changes, Dad. He still meant it that night. That version of my son, the one who still meant what he said, was the last one I saw for a long time. 6 weeks between that dinner and his next visit. When he came back, Beatrice came with him. And after that, what changed in Julian was the kind of change that happens slowly and in every direction. At once, the way a room shifts after someone has rearranged the furniture, nothing you can point to. Everything's slightly wrong. The Carmel City Limits sign passed on my right. Some doors don't close by accident. I'd understood that since that October. I had just spent 4 years hoping I was wrong. I arrived at Hargrove and Associates at 8:45. 15 minutes early. 12 years of aerospace project deadlines had built that into me. Show up before you're needed. You control the room. I cut the engine, set the envelope on the passenger seat, and watched people walk past with their Monday coffees. 45 minutes. 3 years of material. The pattern had started simply. Julian's visits thinned out by 2020 texts, replacing calls, replacing presence, silence, replacing all of it by degrees. I had saved everything. Can't make it this weekend. Beatrice has a thing. Next month for sure, Dad. Tell Mom I called. I never told Eleanor he called when he hadn't. What broke it open was a Tuesday night in March 2021, when Dorothy Gable knocked on my back door at 10 o'clock in the rain. She was holding an envelope, one corner bent from where she'd pulled it out of something. She didn't say good evening. She said, I found this in the trash can on the property line, between your lot and the Ramirez's. It has your name on it. I took it from her. Not my handwriting on the return address, close, but not mine. Same slope, different pressure. I knew my own hand. Inside was a draft letter. Written as if from me. Julian, your mother has asked me to stop inviting you. Every time you come, she deteriorates for 3 days after. The stress of seeing you is more than she can manage now. Please let us have some peace. And Dorothy, did you read this? I read enough. She stood in the doorway, rain beating on her jacket. It's not from you, is it? No, I didn't think so. She stepped inside. What are you going to do? Not yet. I folded it once and put it in my shirt pocket. I need more before I do anything. I grabbed my coat and walked to Julian's house 3 blocks away. The iron gate at the end of his driveway had a keypad. I'd known the code for 4 years. I punched it in. Wrong code. I tried the backup code I'd been given in 2019. Wrong. I stood in the rain in front of my own son's gate with a forged letter in my shirt pocket and a keypad that someone had reprogrammed at some point without mentioning it to me. Dorothy caught up with me on the sidewalk. "The code's been changed," I said. "I know." She changed the access code to my son's house and didn't tell me. "Yes." "Dorothy, how long have you known she was doing things like this?" "Long enough," she said, "that I started paying attention in other ways." She looked at me directly. "Come inside, Silas." I went. At my kitchen table, I made 2 decisions. One, I would say nothing to Julian until I had enough to say everything at once. 2, I needed to document every incident, every date, every absence with a reason attached. I opened the drawer and took out a fresh notebook. Clara's contribution came 3 months later. Eleanor had a bad night in June, calling out disoriented, needing water. I settled her and was heading back through the living room at 2 in the morning when I saw light under the door. Clara was standing at the shelves by the fireplace, a canvas tote bag on her shoulder. Eleanor's crystal horse figurine in her hand. The small one. The figurine Eleanor had owned before she owned anything else worth keeping. Clara turned when she heard me. She didn't drop it. "And Dad." A beat. 2 beats. "She doesn't use any of this anymore. I'm just clearing space for you." "Put it down. It's been sitting there collecting dust." "Put it down, Clara, now." She set it back on the shelf. She adjusted the tote strap. "How many times have you been here when I was at Eleanor's appointments?" I asked. Silence. "How many things have you already sold?" More silence. "Keep your receipts," I said. "Every single one. You'll need them to calculate what you owe your mother when this is over." She walked out. No goodbye. I stood at the shelf and cataloged what was missing: 2 small paintings, a silver frame, a set of porcelain birds Eleanor had carried from New York when we moved west. I wrote everything in the notebook. Dates, descriptions, estimated values. Added it to the page with Julian's texts. Added it to the page with the forged letter, which I'd taped flat inside the back cover. Page by page, 1 entry at a time. The way you build anything that needs to hold weight. On Eleanor's good days that year, she'd sit at the piano and find fragments of the pieces she'd once played whole. 4 bars of Chopin, 8 bars of a Brahms sonata she'd recorded in Vienna in 1994. Her hands knew things her mind had started to lose. "Play it again," I'd say. "I can't remember the middle," she'd say. "To play what you remember." She always did. The courthouse clock across the street from the parking lot chimed 9. I picked up the envelope and got out of the car. Frank had been right about the gray suit. I walked to the entrance of Hargrove and Associates and held the door a moment before going in. Somewhere in that building, Beatrice and Clara were sitting with Gerald Marsh, and they were certain they had won. They hadn't read the notebook. Inside the lobby of Hargrove and Associates, before I reached the conference room door, I caught a glimpse of Beatrice through the frosted glass, sitting with her back perfectly straight, hands folded on the table. 2 months ago, I had last seen her in this house. The memory came back whole. In February that year, Eleanor came back. Not the vague half-presence we'd learned to work around something sharper, something frightening in how clear it was. She knew exactly who she was, who I was, and how much time neither of us had left. The morning of February 11th, I was changing her medication tray when she grabbed my wrist. Her grip was stronger than it had been in months. "Silas, sit down." I sat. "They're going to come while I'm still clear." Her eyes were steady, fully hers. I dreamed of Beatrice last night. She was standing in this room holding a pen and something that looked like a death warrant with your name on it. "Ellie," says, "call Frank. Today. Don't argue with me." A pause. "I've been watching this build for 4 years. I know what's coming. Do you trust me? Always?" Then call Frank. I called him from the back porch. He was in Carmel by 9 the following morning. Beatrice arrived at 2 in the afternoon. No knock. The front door opened. She still had the copy of the key Julian had given her 3 years ago, and she came through the hallway in a black blazer, Clara a half step behind, carrying an oversized tote. Beatrice had a document folder pressed under her arm like a closing brief. She walked straight to Eleanor's music room, where Eleanor was sitting in her chair by the window. Eleanor. Beatrice's voice was soft, practiced. You look so much better. We've been so worried. She opened the folder and set the papers on the side table next to Eleanor's tea. To protect Silas's interests when things change, we just need one signature on this trust authorization. Very simple. It just transfers management so Dad doesn't have to handle everything alone. Eleanor looked at the papers. Then she swept them off the table with the back of her hand. They scattered across the floor. I forget many things. Her voice was quiet, but absolutely level. I forget names. I forget days. I forget which piece I'm supposed to play next. She looked straight at Beatrice. But I have never, not once, forgotten what you are. You don't want to help Silas. You want to bury him right alongside me. Beatrice's expression didn't change. She bent to pick up the papers. Clara, help me. Don't touch those. I stepped into the room from the doorway. Beatrice stood up. Silas, be reasonable. She said no. She's not capable of... Beatrice reached down and took Eleanor's wrist. Not hard. Deliberately. I crossed the room in 3 steps and held her arm by the forearm, not roughly, but without any uncertainty. Leave this house. My voice came out lower than I expected. Right now. Before I do something I will never once regret. You're making a scene. I am a room away from calling the Monterey County Sheriff and telling them that an attorney attempted to coerce my wife into signing a legal document while she was medically impaired. I didn't let go of her forearm. Is that the scene you want? From the hallway, Frank Morrison stepped into the doorway. He'd been in the study when they arrived 15 feet away. He was holding his phone at shoulder-height screen facing the room. Everything said and done in this room in the past 6 minutes has been recorded, Frank said. Coercion of a cognitively impaired adult to execute a legal document violates California elder abuse statute, specifically Welfare and Institutions Code 15610.07. Chitifahadi, he lowered the phone, looked at Beatrice pleasantly. I'd retain your own counsel before tomorrow. You'll want one who knows elder law. Clara looked at Beatrice. We should... Or we're leaving, Beatrice said. They left. The front door closed. Eleanor exhaled slowly. Frank, she said, you got here fast. An old friend called, Frank said. I don't ignore those. That afternoon, Dr. Okafor drove up from Monterey at Silas's request and confirmed in writing that Eleanor was exhibiting full cognitive capacity. She signed 2 documents while Dr. Okafor was present, the deed of gift, transferring the jewelry she'd hidden behind the paintings to Silas, and a handwritten letter addressed to the estate proceedings confirming her intentions. Frank notarized both. Mrs. Gable witnessed. Eleanor signed with a steady hand. Anna, she said when the pen left the paper. At sunset, Eleanor sat by the window with the Pacific going gold-orange below the tree line. She reached up and worked the wedding ring off her finger. 41 years on that hand. She took my palm and pressed it into it. This is the last piece, she said. Keep it close. Her eyes were tired but still completely clear. Don't let them see you cry. When they lock the gate, and they will lock it, Silas, remember, the real key is already in your hands. I couldn't answer her. She knew I couldn't. She patted my hand and looked back out at the water. By midnight, the fog had returned to her eyes. She didn't know my name the next morning, but in 3 days she had done everything that needed to be done. The following morning, I sealed the brown envelope for the first time. The fight was no longer about saving Eleanor. It was about carrying out what she had already won. Conference Room B was the kind of space designed to make you feel small before anyone said a word. Dark, mahogany panels windows that ran floor to ceiling. Leather chairs that cost more than my monthly medical bills in Eleanor's last year. The air smelled like document ink and old wood and money that had been in the same families long enough to stop being discussed. Robert Hargrove, the estate attorney of record 60-something gray at the Temples, the practiced neutrality of a man paid to have no side, had arranged folders at 3 positions before anyone arrived. A digital recorder sat at the center of the table with the quiet authority of something that was going to remember everything, regardless of how anyone felt about it. Frank was at the window. He'd gotten there before me, which was the plan. "Marsh is already in," he said without turning around. I found Gerald Marsh without needing a description. Silver suit, silver cufflinks, the ease of a man who billed $400 an hour and had stopped pretending it was about anything other than that. He was reviewing a document at the far end of the table and hadn't looked up when I walked in. "You know him," I said. "I know of him." Frank finally turned from the window. He kept his voice level and low. "Don't react. Don't engage. Not yet." "What does not yet mean?" Frank almost smiled. "It means I've been waiting 11 years for a reason to be in the same room as Gerald Marsh again. I'd like to do it correctly." Julian arrived at 9:12. He came through the door at a pace that suggested he had spent the walk from the lobby deciding something. He saw me immediately. I was the only person at that end of the table, and stopped. 3 seconds of something complicated working across his face. He started toward me once. Then Marsh said his name from across the room, quiet and deliberate, and Julian changed direction. He sat down on their side of the table without speaking to me. He put both hands flat in front of him and looked at the table. I had told myself not to expect anything. I was finding at 9:13 in the morning that telling yourself something and being ready for it are different categories of the same problem. Beatrice and Clara arrived at 9:55. Together, which meant planned. Beatrice wore a charcoal blazer, hair pulled back, dressed for a transaction. Clara was in black, the kind of black that cost money. Neither acknowledged me when they walked in. Not a glance away, the more deliberate kind of not looking, where you've decided in advance not to register that a person exists. Beatrice sat. She touched her water glass, once moved it a 1/4 inch, left it there. She opened the folder Marsh slid toward her and scanned 2 pages before closing it again. Whatever she read, it settled her. Hargrove cleared his throat at 10 o'clock exactly. "We're here for the formal reading of the last will and testament of Eleanor Ann Sterling, dated March 3rd, 2020, with codicil dated February 13th, 2023. He looked around the table once, the look of a man confirming head count. "I'll complete the reading before opening the floor." He read, "Eleanor's estate was organized around a legal distinction that most people don't think about until it matters. The difference between community property assets built during the marriage and separate property, which belongs entirely to the individual who brought it in or inherited it independently. The house at 17 Cypress Ridge Road, Carmel by the Sea, had been left to Eleanor by her father in his will in 1989, 7 years before Eleanor and I were married. The trust fund had been established from her concert earnings in the 1970s and early 1980s, also before we met. Both were her separate property. Under California law, she had absolute authority to direct them as she chose. She directed them to Julian and Clara equally. Her personal effects, photographs, correspondence, sentimental objects went to me. A specific bequest of $10,000 was directed to the clinic of Dr. Nora Okafor, Eleanor's neurologist. That was the will. I watched Beatrice's hands on the table. They didn't move. But somewhere in the shoulders or behind the eyes, the smallest release. The microscopic undoing of tension from a person who has just confirmed an answer they'd already committed to. "Is that everything?" Clara said. There is an addendum, Hargrove said. The room went very still. Beatrice's hands came back together. Mrs. Sterling requested. Hargrove continued reading from a separate document, that before any distribution proceeds, a sealed envelope be opened, and its contents read aloud in the presence of all parties present. The envelope was held in escrow by Mr. Frank Morrison, who is acting today as executor of this specific addendum, only a role distinct from legal representation. Marsh was on his feet before Hargrove finished the sentence. Opposing counsel was not disclosed. I object to the introduction of any document. I'm not opposing counsel, Gerald. Frank's voice hadn't changed in inflection or tempo. I'm executing a testamentary addendum per the explicit written instruction of the decedent. Those are two separate legal roles, and I'm confident you know the difference between them. A pause calibrated intentional. The notarized escrow agreement predates this proceeding by 60 days. I have a copy for Mr. Hargrove. He slid it across without being asked. Hargrove reviewed it, nodded, set it in his pile. Marsh sat back down. He wrote something on his legal pad without looking up. Frank reached into his briefcase and set the manila envelope on the mahogany table, worn at one corner, sealed, my handwriting on the front. Every eye in the room moved to it at the same time. Beatrice looked at it for 1 second, then at Clara. Frank broke the seal. Frank pulled out the first page. Clara moved before he had it fully open. 12 years of watching courtrooms had taught me one thing. When someone acts before seeing the evidence, they already know exactly what evidence they're afraid of. Clara moved before Frank had the envelope fully open. She slid a document folder across the mahogany with the practiced confidence of someone who had rehearsed the motion. Before we continue, she said, this proceeding should note that Silas Sterling has been clinically assessed and found to exhibit signs of diminished cognitive capacity, which may compromise his standing to. One moment. Frank picked up the single page she'd pushed across. He read it. 8 seconds. Julian watched his sister. Beatrice kept her eyes on the window. Hargrove's pen stayed above the page. I counted the seconds because I had nothing else to contribute just yet. Frank set the page down. Clara. His voice hadn't shifted 1 degree in either direction. The physician who signed this certificate is Dr. Raymond Cole. Dr. Cole had his California medical license revoked in 2021. He was convicted on 83 counts of Medicare fraud in the Northern District of California federal case sentencing, completed April of that year. Frank pushed the page back across the table. This document is legally void. Submitting it in a formal estate proceeding is fraud on the court under California Penal Code 132. That's not a warning. That's a statute. He looked at her without expression. I'd strongly advise you not to touch it again. Clara looked at the page sitting in front of her. She did not touch it. Hargrove picked up his pen. For the record, the court will note that the submitted document has been identified as legally invalid and will not be entered into evidence. We have a secondary assessment, Marsh said, opening his folder. A backup certification from a second qualified physician dated Gerald, just his name. Frank let it sit in the air. You are genuinely going to introduce a second document of this nature into this proceeding while I am standing in this room? It wasn't a question. I've practiced law in this state for 38 years. I have a recorder, a witness, and a notarized timeline that starts 60 days before today. Please. A pause that was almost generous. Show me what's in that folder. Marsh closed the folder. The room made no sound for a moment. Beatrice was very still. She had the quality of someone recalculating, not panicking, not surrendering, just computing new variables. Whatever she was running through wasn't finished. Julian was looking at Clara. Something had changed in him in the last 90 seconds, and whatever it wasn't comfortable. Clara, he said, low and careful. Who found Cole? Julian. That certificate came from somewhere. Someone researched him. Someone filled it out. He wasn't raising his voice. That somehow made it worse. Who? Clara aligned her folder with the edge of the table and looked at nothing. Julian turned slightly toward Beatrice. Beatrice looked at the window. He turned back. I looked at my daughter across a conference table that had become a different kind of territory than any room I'd shared with her before. 36 years old. I had once lifted her onto my shoulders at a beach fair so she could see above the crowd, and she had grabbed my ears to hold on. I looked at her face now and searched for that child. I found the shape of her and nothing else. Frank and I said, "Let's continue." Let's. He reached into the envelope and lifted out the first document from the stack, Dr. Okafor's contemporaneous attendance log, 47 pages, date-stamped, at every appointment across 4 years. He laid it open on the table and looked around the room once evenly before he began reading. These are attending physician records from Dr. Nora Okafor, board-certified neurologist, Monterey Bay Medical Center. Contemporaneous entries signed and stamped at the time of each appointment. He cleared his throat. On March 15th, 2020. Appointment number 1. Patient accompanied by Silas Sterling. Clara stared at the table. March 29th, 2020. Appointment number 2. Patient accompanied by Silas Sterling. Hargrove was writing in his margin, quietly, steadily. What, April 12th, 2020, appointment 3, patient accompanied by Silas Sterling. Beatrice had gone very still, not the careful stillness of someone composed, but the stillness of someone who has stopped moving because movement would give too much away. May 10th, 2020, appointment 4, patient accompanied by Silas Sterling. Marsh had set his pen on the table. He was watching Frank with the expression of a man who has just understood the difference between the case he was briefed on and the case that was actually in this room. "I have 47 entries," Frank said without looking up. "Every appointment Dr. Okafor scheduled for Eleanor Sterling from 2020 through early 2023. Each one carries the same notation." He looked across the table, not at Beatrice, at Marsh specifically. "I'll read all 47 aloud if that's preferred, or submit the complete log to Mr. Hargrove now and proceed to the remainder of the addendum." "Submit it," Hargrove said. Frank slid the document to Hargrove's position. Hargrove accepted it, placed it in his pile, and noted something on the cover page without comment. The room had the quality of air before a storm, not loud, not moving, but changed in some pressure that everyone in it could feel and no one was naming. The conference room door opened. No one had called anyone in. Leo stepped through, 7 years old, blazer slightly crooked, the clip-on tie from the funeral still clipped on. He'd been in the waiting area with the receptionist. He stood in the doorway now, scanning the room with the focused uncertainty of a child who has gone somewhere he wasn't supposed to and isn't sure yet if he's in trouble. In his left hand, hanging by the strap, was a green plastic toy recorder, the chunky kind with the big round red button on the side. "He found me across the table, Grandpa," he said. He was 7 years old with a clip-on tie slightly off-center, and he walked straight to Frank like he'd been given directions. "Mr. Frank." Leo stopped at the edge of the table. "Grandpa said you're the one who helps." "That's right," Frank said, crouching to his eye level. "What have you got there, Leo?" There's Mom's voice in it. Leo held the green recorder out with both hands. The chunky plastic kind, big red button on the side. The kind that comes in a gift, set with a badge and a magnifying glass. "I didn't break it. I just found new batteries in the desk thing outside. The lady said it was okay." He looked at it, then back at Frank. "It was in Mom's bag. I thought it was mine, but it's the same color." Frank took the recorder carefully. He looked at it for exactly 1 second. Then he looked at me. I nodded. I didn't know what was on it. But I knew Leo. Frank set it on the table where everyone could see it. Mr. Hargrove, I'd like this moment noted for the record. He pressed play. The room went quiet before the sound even started. Beatrice's voice came out clean and specific the way it always did. No hesitation, no softening. The cheapest psychiatric facility in Salinas runs $4,000 a month. Once the certificate is filed and cleared, we can have him placed within 72 hours. He won't even understand what's happening to him. Clara's voice followed slightly lower, with something underneath it that almost sounded like amusement. And then the house, a half-second pause. Then Beatrice again. What then? It's ours, completely free. And that old man becomes someone else's problem. Frank pressed stop. The room held whatever it was holding and did not let it go. I did not look at Beatrice. I didn't need to. I watched Julian instead. He was sitting completely still, both hands flat on the table, staring at the point on the wood where his hands met. He had just heard his wife's voice say that old man. He had just heard it in this room in front of his father, in front of an estate attorney, and 2 copies of a legal record. He did not say her name. He did not look at her. He just sat there with his hands flat and breathed. Clara was studying the corner of the ceiling. Beatrice had not moved. Her posture was the same. Her expression was controlled. But her water glass had moved 2 inches from where she'd set it, and she hadn't touched it. Leo was looking around the room, reading it the way children read rooms, not the words, just the temperature. He tugged the sleeve of my jacket. Grandpa, is Mom in trouble? I pushed back my chair and crouched down to his height. The floor was cold through my trousers, and I didn't rush. The grown-ups are sorting some things out, I said. Mrs. Patterson's waiting for you outside, okay? She said she has a puzzle. What kind? The good kind, 100 pieces. He thought about this. Then he nodded the way children nod when they've decided an answer is acceptable, even if incomplete. He picked up the recorder from the table where Frank had set it down. Leo, Frank said gently. Can we keep that here for a little while? Leo considered this seriously. Will I get it back? You'll get it back. He handed it over and walked to the door. At the threshold, he stopped and turned the way he'd done at the cemetery gate 2 days before, looking for me across a distance. Grandpa, he said, the recorder just needed new batteries. Mom said it was broken. A pause. But it wasn't broken. He went out. The door closed with the quiet of a room that has just been permanently altered. No one spoke for 4 full seconds. I counted them the way I'd counted everything else. A child's toy cannot be admitted as evidence in a marsh started, in a civil proceeding, correct? Frank's voice had the particular evenness of someone who had already thought 3 steps past the objection. But as grounds to refer a criminal matter to the Monterey County Sheriff's Department, that evaluation belongs to Detective Calloway, not to you or me. He picked up his phone from the table and set it face-up, screen on. Would you like me to call him now? Or would you prefer to see what else is in this envelope first? Marsh looked at Beatrice. Beatrice looked at nothing. Let the record note, Hargrove said quietly, writing as he spoke, that an audio recording was played in these proceedings at 10:31 a.m. Its admissibility in these proceedings is pending. A copy will be retained by this office pending any supplementary legal action. He set his pen down. He looked across the room, not at anyone specific. Just across it. Mr. Morrison, please continue with the addendum. Gladly, Frank said. Beatrice was still sitting in the same room where her own voice had just played. The air in the room was the same air she was breathing. No one looked at her. Not Julian. Not Hargrove. Not Marsh. The particular cruelty of a room that has decided to act as if you are not there is something that cannot be argued with. And Beatrice Sterling in that moment had no argument left to make. Frank reached back into the envelope. He hadn't finished yet. Not even close. Before Marsh could reorganize himself, the conference room door opened for the second time that morning. Dorothy Gable stepped through, 71 years old, retired ER nurse. 11 years my neighbor with a small wooden box tucked under one arm. The kind of box people keep important things in when they don't trust safes. She looked at me first, then at Frank. "Am I late?" she said. "Right on time," Frank said. "Take a seat, Dorothy. Before I show you what was inside that wooden box and what Eleanor told Dorothy to keep hidden for 18 months, drop the number 9 in the comments if you're still here with me. Because what comes out of that box didn't just change this proceeding. It changed everything Julian thought he knew about his own mother. One note before we continue. Parts of this story include dramatized elements. Some details have been shaped for clarity and reflection, if that's not the kind of story you're here for. This is a good place to stop. No judgment either way. Dorothy Gable was 71 years old and had spent 30 years in emergency rooms making fast decisions about people on the worst days of their lives. She didn't enter the room. She occupied it, the specific occupation of someone who has stood at enough bedsides to understand that presence is its own form of authority. She set the wooden box on the conference table and sat down across from Hargrove without waiting to be asked. "I'm Dorothy Gable," she said for anyone who needed it on record. "I've been Silas Sterling's neighbor for 11 years. Eleanor Sterling gave me this box 18 months ago and asked me to hold it." She looked around the table at Frank, at Hargrove, briefly at Beatrice. Not at Clara. That omission was deliberate, and the room understood it. "She told me what the room would look like when it was time to bring it, who would be in it, what would have already been said." "Were those instructions documented?" Hargrove asked. "Handwritten, dated, and signed." She slid a folded paper from her jacket to Hargrove's position, with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to handing things across surfaces in difficult moments. "She also asked me to be present when it was opened." "Noted," Hargrove said and accepted it. Frank lifted the box lid. Inside, settled in a square of folded cloth, was a small leather diary, dark brown corners worn to bare, stitching a thin silk ribbon, marking a page 2/3 through. The leather had the quality of something handled regularly, not stored away, but kept close. He picked it up the way you pick up something you know is important, carefully with both hands. "Eleanor dated her entries," Frank said. "I'll read the ones she marked." He opened to the first ribbon. The room had gone quiet in a particular way, not the quiet of people waiting, but the quiet of people who have recognized that what is about to be read has been waiting longer than any of them. March 20th, 2021. 6 weeks since Julian came by. Silas keeps making excuses for him. I heard the phone call. Julian said, "Maybe next time." I know what next time means. I've known since October what it means. I'm not angry at Julian. I'm angry that someone taught him to disappear from people who need him and call it not being ready. Julian was very still, both palms flat on the table, pressed down as if he was holding something in place that wanted to move. His jaw was set. The expression of a man reading his own history in a handwriting he would recognize anywhere. He didn't look at anyone. Frank turned to the second ribbon. He found the page, read it once to himself, before he read it aloud, a brief pause, the smallest one that told the room the next section required it. June 2022. He read without inflection. The diary didn't need it. Clara came while Silas was at the pharmacy. I knocked over my tea, reaching for the cup, my fault entirely. When I reached toward her, she grabbed my arm and held it. "I don't want to write the rest of this." My arm hurt for a week. Silas thinks I bruised it on the bed frame. I chose not to tell him otherwise. He carries enough. The room was completely still. "That is a fabrication." Clara's voice came out quick and sharp, the reflex of someone who has had a response prepared for a version of this moment and is deploying it before the room can decide what it heard. She had a degenerative condition. Her memory was unreliable. Her perception of events was... "I took a photograph of the bruise," Dorothy said. The table went quiet. Not the quiet from before something different. the specific silence that arrives when a room's last available exit has been closed from the outside. The following morning, when Silas took Eleanor to her therapy appointment, I'd brought her tea and I saw her arm. Dorothy's voice was level, not cold, not warm. The particular register of a person who has said hard things for a living and knows how to say them without embellishment. Because embellishment is what you use when the facts need help, and these facts did not. 30 years in emergency medicine. I know the difference between a bed frame injury and a grip mark, the depth, the finger spacing, the distribution. She reached into the wooden box, removed a photograph, and placed it face up on the mahogany table. This is what I saw. She did not look at Clara after she set it down. Clara looked at the photograph, then away. Then back involuntarily, the way you look at something you want to stop being real and find that reality operates independently of your wishes. I'd like that photograph, Marsh began. It's been entered into evidence, Frank said without looking up from his notes. Exhibit C. It stays. Marsh wrote something on his legal pad. Tight, small letters. The writing of a man reducing his options to what fits in a margin. Julian was looking at the photograph. He had the expression of someone who has just been handed a piece of information that rewrites everything they thought they understood. About the last 2 years, the slow rearrangement of a face as the brain processes something the heart had already decided. Clara, he said. His voice had lost the restraint it had carried all morning. Did you put your hands on Mom? Silence. Look at me. And Julian, this isn't Clara. A third time. 3 syllables that had nothing left in them but the weight of having grown up with someone and arriving finally at a table like this one. Answer the question. Beatrice reached for Julian's arm. He moved it away without looking at her. A slow, deliberate, unmistakable withdrawal, not a flinch, not a recoil. A decision made in real time about where his arm would and would not be placed. Beatrice looked at her own hand, as if it had done something she hadn't authorized. Julian stared at his sister. This is Mom. This is her handwriting. That is her arm in that photograph. His voice cracked once briefly, and he closed his mouth and opened it again. When were you going to tell me what happened in that house? Clara said nothing to that. Nobody filled the silence for her. The room had stopped offering that to people who hadn't earned it. I looked at the photograph on the table. I had believed the bed frame completely, had suggested the arnica gel, had not asked twice because Eleanor had smiled and moved on, and I had let her. She had carried the knowledge of what Clara had done, and held it away from me deliberately, not to forgive Clara, not to forget it, but because she had already decided what to do with it, and she had needed me clear-headed for the last 18 months, not fractured. I had thought I was protecting her. She had been protecting me. I heard my own voice from somewhere quiet. She never told me. Dorothy looked at me for a moment. Something passed across her face that was not pity and was not quite grief. The look of someone who has delivered the message they were asked to deliver and is now present for what it costs the person who receives it. Mr. Hargrove, Frank said, Exhibit C into the record, Dorothy Gable as witness. Noted. Hargrove completed his margin note, added a line beneath it. Any objection? Marsh looked at Clara. Clara gave him nothing, not a direction, not a signal, not even acknowledgement that she understood the question was waiting. She was looking at the photograph as though looking long enough might reframe what it showed. No objection, Marsh said quietly. Frank closed the diary with care. He set it back in the box. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the table, and the room had the quality of something that has reached a natural resting point, not an ending. But the particular stillness before terrain changes, and the paths that were available 5 minutes ago have been replaced by entirely different ones. There is one final matter, he said. He looked around the table with the unhurried attention of someone conducting an inventory. And I want everyone in this room to understand something clearly. The next 10 minutes will fundamentally alter the nature of what this proceeding is. He set his hand flat on the last folder inside the envelope. Not just the distribution, the entire premise. Marsh shifted in his chair. A small, deliberate movement. The movement of a man beginning to calculate whether the distance to the door is shorter than he thought, and arriving at the answer that it is not. Frank opened the next folder the way a surgeon opens a chest. No rush, no theater, because the work itself would produce all the drama it needed, and any additional performance would only get in the way of it. Mr. Marsh. His eyes stayed on the folder. How long have you represented Beatrice Sterling in this matter? Marsh adjusted his posture. The slight recalibration of a man who has just identified the direction from which something is coming. I was retained to represent the interests of the estate, which Mrs. Sterling. Frank looked up, just his eyes. Eleanor Sterling, the decedent, or Beatrice Sterling, the interested party. A pause, short. The kind that is dense with everything two people in a room know and neither of them has said yet. I was retained by Beatrice Sterling to... And prior to this matter, did you have any personal relationship with Beatrice Sterling outside of a professional context? Marsh's color left his face in the specific way of someone whose blood has gone somewhere more urgent, not dramatic, not slow. The real kind. I'm not certain how that is. There's a transcript, Frank said, from recordings made in Silas Sterling's home office. 4 sessions each with Silas present as a party. I'll read from it. He located the first marked section and looked around the table once before beginning not to gauge reaction, but as a man confirming that everyone who needed to be present was present. Beatrice Sterling's voice. If Julian finds the coastal account, we're going to have a problem. Marsh's voice. He won't. Keep him focused on the old man. Beatrice. Silas has been documenting everything, Gerald. Marsh. Leave the documentary record to me. That's my area. Frank set the page down. Julian had gone very still at the phrase "the old man." His jaw tightened once. He didn't say anything. Mr. Hargrove, California Rules of Professional Conduct, Rule 1.7. An attorney with a personal relationship to an interested party, one that creates a material conflict with their duty of representation, is disqualified from that representation. Are you familiar with that rule? I am, Hargrove said. Do you require a citation? I do not. Marsh opened his mouth. Frank kept speaking with the particular patience of a man who has no interest in being interrupted at this moment. Additionally, engaging in coordinated strategy to suppress documentary evidence while representing an interested party constitutes grounds for immediate state bar referral. He turned one more page. There is a second section. Different date. Same office. He looked at Julian first. Julian was watching him with the focus of someone bracing for impact, the specific stillness of a person who has learned in the last 3 hours that the ground beneath most of the past year was not what they thought it was, and is now waiting to see how much further down it goes. Frank read. It's Marsh. The medication bottle from that night. It should have been disposed of immediately, Beatrice. I had to spend considerable effort adjusting the hospital records to align with the forensic clinical results. I'm taught to Beatrice. Silas was too consumed with grieving to notice anything about the final dose. Just make sure the funeral home staff stays quiet. The room went somewhere else, not silence. Silence implies the absence of something. This was different. This was the presence of something so large that everything else had been displaced by it. The air in the room had changed the way air changes in the moment, before a storm commits to itself. Dorothy's hand moved to the table edge. She gripped it without looking down the grip of someone who needs to confirm that something solid is still where they left it. Clara had gone very still, staring at a fixed point on the mahogany, as if looking away from it might require acknowledging that she was in the room. Julian was looking at nothing. The specific look of a person watching their understanding of the past year dismantle itself one component at a time, each piece arriving in a sequence that is no longer reversible. Frank set both hands flat on the table. This second section was recorded after Mr. Sterling had stepped briefly from the room. He left the recorder running. I will not submit it as direct civil evidence. His voice was even and deliberate, the voice of a man who has thought through every word of this in advance and is delivering it exactly as planned. However, I am formally notifying this proceeding that I will be contacting Detective Calloway of the Monterey County Sheriff's Department immediately following today's session. The determination of this recording's relevance to a criminal investigation is his to make, not mine. He turned to Hargrove. I'd like both sections noted in the record as Exhibit D. Noted. Hargrove wrote it. His voice had retained its professional neutrality, but barely the way a structure retains its shape when tested right up to the edge of its tolerance. Exhibit D. Julian was looking at Beatrice. She had not looked at him since the second section was read. The final dose, Julian said. Flat, careful. The way you repeat something back when you are deciding still whether it means what you think it means, and whether you are responsible for what happens next if it does. Beatrice, nothing. Was she in pain? At the end, just tell me that. Was she in pain? Beatrice looked at the table. What did you give her? Julian. Her voice for the first time in 20 minutes came out of her thin and careful, the voice of damage control. That recording is legally... What did you give my mother? He wasn't shouting. He wasn't close to shouting. He was much quieter than that, which was considerably more frightening, the quietness of something that has compressed beyond its container and is no longer making predictions about what comes next. She was a person. She was mine. And she is dead. Beatrice closed her mouth. The room stayed with that for 3 full seconds. No one filled it. Mr. Marsh, Frank said, turning. You have a documented personal relationship with a primary interested party. You coordinated strategy to suppress evidence in this proceeding. You participated in a conversation describing the deliberate alteration of hospital records under Rule 1.7 and the supplementary provisions governing attorney conduct in estate proceedings. You are disqualified. I'm formally requesting your withdrawal now. Marsh capped his pen, closed his folder with a quiet click, placed both in his briefcase with the measured deliberateness of a man who has decided that pace is the only dignity remaining to him and intends to spend it carefully. Gerald, Frank said. Marsh didn't answer. He didn't look at Beatrice, and he didn't look at Frank, and he didn't look at anyone on his way to the door. He opened it, stepped through, and the door closed behind him with the quiet sound of a room that has just become more honest about what it contains. Julian looked at the empty chair where Marsh had been, then at the closed door, then at his wife across the table. You could see it working across his face, 2 years of assumptions, arriving for re-examination at the exact same moment, each one rewriting the version of events that came before it. The way an edit propagates backward through a document and changes the meaning of everything that preceded it. Beatrice sat alone on her side of the table. No attorney, no folder to reference, no record to pull a citation from, nothing between her and what was in the official record of this proceeding that was now going to outlast everything she had built. Hargrove looked at her with the neutrality of a man entirely clear about what his responsibilities required of him, and no clearer than that. Miss Sterling, given what has been entered into this record, I think it appropriate to note that the nature of this proceeding has materially changed. A pause. Official brief. Would you like a brief recess to arrange new representation? Beatrice said nothing. The table held its position. The recorder held its position. The window held its afternoon light. Mr. Morrison, Hargrove said quietly, shall we continue? We should, Frank said. Dr. Okafor will help us understand how. The conference room door opened. Dr. Nora Okafor stepped through Monterey Bay Medical Center credentials clipped to her lapel, a sealed folder under one arm. 4 years of Eleanor Sterling's medical history organized in her head, with the particular precision of someone who knew this moment was coming and prepared accordingly. She looked at Frank, then at Hargrove. "I believe I was expected," she said. "Yes," Hargrove said. "Please sit down." Dr. Okafor sat down the way she did everything, having already calculated where she'd be most useful and placing herself there without explanation or apology. She set the sealed folder on the table and opened it with the brisk economy of someone who has sat in difficult rooms before and learned that clarity and speed are the same thing. For the record," she said, looking at Hargrove first, then around the table. "I am Dr. Nora Okafor. I served as Eleanor Sterling's primary neurologist at Monterey Bay Medical Center from October 2019 until her death on April 7th of this year. Ms. Sterling's addendum requested my presence at this proceeding. I have 2 sets of records to present." "Mrs. Sterling specified your appearance in the addendum?" Hargrove asked, in writing, dated February 13th. She looked at Frank. Frank produced a copy and slid it to Hargrove without a word. "Thank you," Hargrove said. "Continue." She opened the first document, the attendance log pages of date-stamped entries, each signed by the clinical staff member present. Eleanor Sterling attended 47 scheduled appointments across 4 years and 5 months. Silas Sterling accompanied her to all 47. She let the number sit for exactly 1 second. In those same 4 years, Eleanor was accompanied by one other family member on 2 occasions. Julian Sterling, November 14th, 2020, and March 9th, 2022. She looked at the records. Clara Sterling accompanied her mother to 0 appointments. "I had professional obligations that prevented," Clara started. Dr. Okafor looked at her. Nothing in it was unkind. There was just something in it that was finished with that sentence before it was spoken. 30 years of patience. The specific patience of someone who has watched families deflect in every possible direction had produced a look that took up no space and required no response. Clara didn't finish the sentence. "In my 22 years working with dementia patients and their families," Dr. Okafor continued as if the interruption had not occurred, "the average attendance rate for any caregiver, professional, or familial at neurological appointments is 70 to 78%. Fatigue scheduling, work obligations account for the remainder." She turned one page in the attendance log. Mr. Sterling had no absences, no cancellations, no substitutions, not one in 47. A pause. "I have not observed that in another patient's record in my career." Frank said, "In your professional assessment, does that attendance record reflect a standard of engagement you'd consider adequate for Eleanor's level of care?" "Oh, the word adequate doesn't apply," she said. "Mr. Sterling's involvement exceeded every benchmark I'd apply to professional caregivers, let alone family members, by a significant margin." She requested the log entered as Exhibit E. Hargrove accepted it. Julian had been looking at the attendance page since Dr. Okafor read the numbers. He was rereading them, checking the count again with his eyes, looking for a version where 47 didn't mean 47. "Twice," he said, very quietly to the table surface. "She was sick for 4 years, and I was there twice." He was not asking anyone to respond. He was accounting. Arriving at a sum he hadn't been willing to add up before this room required it of him, Dr. Okafor opened the second folder. She slid 2 pages to Hargrove and Frank, then kept the third, the composite chart, face down on the table. "The clinical progression records," she said. "From October 2019 through December 2021, Eleanor's cognitive decline tracked consistently with early-onset vascular dementia. The rate was within the anticipated range. The markers were where I expected them. She set the second page alongside the first. Beginning January 2022, the trajectory changed. She waited. The room had good acoustics for waiting. The rate of decline accelerated to a degree that exceeded my standard disease model by a margin I cannot account for using the patient's known history diagnosis or coexisting conditions. I documented this in real time. I ordered additional imaging February 2022, June 2022. I consulted 2 colleagues at UCSF. Her hands were folded. Now, neither colleague could account for the acceleration either. Beatrice looked at the second page. Then she looked at the table. Then she looked at the page again very briefly before settling on the center of the mahogany as a neutral point. Clara glanced at her. Beatrice did not glance back. "Do you have a hypothesis?" Frank asked. "I have one," Dr. Okafor said. "I prefer to present it after reviewing the full transcript that was entered into evidence this morning. I've been briefed on its general content. I have not seen the complete text." She looked at Hargrove. "I'd ask that a copy be provided before I make a formal clinical statement." "That will be arranged," Hargrove said. "Today." Dorothy reached across and touched Frank's sleeve briefly the way you touch something, to confirm it's still real. He looked at her. She looked at the chart. He nodded once. Dr. Okafor reached for the composite chart she'd kept face down. She pushed it to the center of the table. 4 years of Eleanor's cognitive decline, rendered in a single line on standard graph paper, through 2019-2020, 2021. The line descended at a measured angle, the predictable arithmetic of a known disease taking its course. January 2022, the line changed direction. Not a gradual steepening, a pivot abrupt, decisive the way a car that has lost its brakes doesn't slow into the curve, but abandons it entirely. Nobody spoke. "I've been doing this work for 22 years, Dr. Okafor said. Her voice had moved somewhere outside its clinical register. Not far outside, just enough that you could hear the person separate from the physician. "I've worked with hundreds of caregivers, family professional volunteer, every configuration." She looked at the chart. "I have not documented a non-professional caregiver who provided care of the consistency, duration, and quality that Mr. Sterling provided over these 47 months. Not once. Not in 22 years. She looked at me directly. Eleanor Sterling was fortunate to have him, she said. "Whatever this proceeding determines, I want that in the record." I said Eleanor deserved that. A short quiet. "Yes," Dr. Okafor said. And this time it came entirely from the person and not the physician. She did. Julian wasn't hiding anything. He wasn't trying to manage the room's perception of him. He was sitting with both hands flat on the table, tears moving down his face with no performance attached. The way you cry when you've finally stopped calculating the cost of stopping. He looked at me across the table. Just once. I looked back. I didn't look away. Beatrice was watching the composite chart. She had not looked up since Dr. Okafor placed it on the table. Whatever she was working through it was producing nothing visible on the surface, just the stillness of someone who has realized that the architecture they built their plan on was constructed over a fault line. Hargrove completed a final notation beside Exhibit E and set his pen down. He looked at Frank. "Mr. Morrison, when you're ready." Frank arranged the 2 remaining folders on the table in front of him. He looked at the room, not at any single person. The whole room as if taking inventory of what it had become. The acceleration that began in January 2022. He said, "Will be addressed by Detective Calloway with Dr. Okafor's assistance through a separate track. But in this proceeding, before we close, I'd like to discuss what Julian and Clara will actually receive when distribution takes effect." He reached for the second-to-last folder in the envelope. Beatrice's eyes tracked his hand as it crossed the table. She had been very still for a long time, but her eyes moved. Frank opened the folder the way you open something you've been waiting a long time to place on a table. Not a property at 17 Cypress Ridge Road, Carmel by the Sea. He set the first document in front of Hargrove official letterhead Monterey County Registrar. Designated a California Historic Landmark in July of 2019. Eleanor Sterling submitted the application herself. The designation was accompanied by a conservation easement recorded against the property title in the same month. The easement is held by the California Historic Preservation Trust. He slid a copy down the table. Ati, the easement is a binding legal instrument. It runs with the land. Any future owner inherits both the property and the easement's obligations. Clara picked up the copy. She read for 4 seconds. A conservation covenant doesn't prevent us from selling it. Frank found the relevant section and turned the document so the text faced her. The easement prohibits structural modification, demolition, subdivision, and change of primary use. Any of those require approval from the California Historic Preservation Trust. The average processing time for approval requests is 4 years. The approval rate is under 15%. He looked at her without expression. There is no buyer in this market, or any market I've practiced in, who purchases a fully encumbered historic property with a comprehensive conservation easement attached. Not at any price that benefits the seller. A moment. We can apply for an exception, Beatrice said. First words she'd spoken since before Marsh left. You can, Frank said. The process takes 4 years and succeeds 14.6% of the time. Do you have 4 years? He pulled the next page. Because the annual maintenance obligation under the easement runs $75,000 to $90,000 per year. That is not discretionary, it's a legal obligation of ownership. Non-compliance triggers enforcement by the trust, which can result in forced sale at terms set by the trust, not by you. The trust fund, Clara started. Clara. Frank looked at her with patience he had rationed carefully all morning, and was nearly done rationing. Let me finish. He placed the bank statement on the table. The Eleanor Sterling Trust was valued at $800,000 when established. Over 4 years and 5 months, it funded medication costs, specialized medical equipment, home nursing assessments, neurological evaluations, and hospice services. He tapped the final line on the statement. Current balance, $62,400. The number sat in the room like an object that had been dropped and didn't bounce. $62,000 against a $300,000 conservation bond required within 60 days of accepting the bequest. Frank set the statement flat on the table. Accepting the property, as structured, requires capital your clients do not have. Clara was looking at the bank statement. She was doing math the way you do math when you don't want it to come out the way it's coming out. Checking the arithmetic twice, getting the same answer. Beatrice had gone very still. The kind of still that comes from a person who has just encountered a wall where they expected a door, and is pressing their hands flat against it to confirm it's real. 3 years ago, Julian's voice came out of a place he hadn't been using all morning. Lower, slower, the voice of a man excavating something. You came to me 3 years ago and told me the trust fund was being drained, that Silas was pulling from it without authorization. He looked at Beatrice. You showed me projections. You told me if we didn't act, Julian. Beatrice's voice was still controlled, still measured. But the ratio of ease to effort had changed. This is not the place to, you told me he was stealing from it. Julian wasn't raising his voice yet. He was close. That was why you said we needed to limit his access. That was why you told me not to send money when he asked. That was why he stopped. He looked at the bank statement, then back at her. What exactly was he stealing, Beatrice? Because I'm looking at 4 years of medical bills for my mother, and the math is just medical bills. And Julian, this is not the conversation. He was paying for her care. The quietness was gone. The words came out with the force of something that had been held for a long time and had just exceeded the capacity of the container. He was paying for her care with the money she set aside for her care, and you told me he was stealing. You came to our house, and you sat at our table, and you told me. Julian, 3 years. Now his voice filled the room. Not screaming. Worse than screaming, the full flat volume of a man who has just watched 3 years of his choices rest on a single lie. 3 years I didn't push back because I believed what you said. 3 years I told myself it was complicated. 3 years I convinced myself not to ask harder questions. The room was at the specific silence that follows a sound that can't be taken back. Silas said nothing. He was looking at the table. He had calculated somewhere around the 2nd year that Julian had been told something incorrect. He had never known what exactly. Now he did, Julian Frank said, quiet and direct. It's in the record. Julian looked at him. He nodded once in the way of a man being handed something to hold on to. He pressed his palms down. He didn't say anything further. Dorothy spoke for the first time since she'd given her testimony. She spent an afternoon in July 2019 filling out paperwork at the kitchen table, Dorothy said. I saw it through the window when I came to return her pie dish. She looked completely calm, like she knew exactly what she was doing. She did, I said. I had been there that afternoon. Eleanor had been at the kitchen table with a form official-looking government letterhead, and when I asked what it was, she'd said, getting something organized. And then she'd smiled and asked if I wanted coffee, and I had never thought to follow up. 3 months later, she was diagnosed. She had known. Not that she was sick, she couldn't have known that yet. But she had known what kind of people her family was. She had already started building. Mr. Hargrove, Frank said. The conservation easement is Exhibit F. The bank statement, Exhibit G. Denoted, Hargrove said, and made 2 entries without looking up. Clara said. There must be a provision, some mechanism to... Page 7 of the easement describes the hardship appeal process. Frank closed the folder. As I said, 4 years, 14.6%. He looked at her directly. I'd start the application today if I were you. You have 60 days before the bond is due. Clara set the document down. Before we address the remaining trust fund question in full, Frank said, I'd like to suggest a brief adjournment, 5 minutes, and a move to the Sterling residence. He looked at me with the look of someone who has been waiting a long time for a carefully arranged moment to arrive. There is one final item in Eleanor's estate that doesn't appear in any filing. I think it's best seen in person. He began gathering the last folder. Beatrice looked at me for the first time since the recording section had played. I looked back. She looked away first. 6 minutes between the law office and the house on Cypress Ridge. Nobody spoke for most of it. Hargrove rode with Frank. Julian drove his own car. Clara sat in the passenger seat and looked at the window. Beatrice sat in the back and looked at nothing in particular, the careful, sustaining look of someone managing internal terrain. I drove alone. The music room faced west. Eleanor had chosen the west-facing room deliberately. She said she wanted to see something that didn't end while she played. The Pacific was visible from the window on clear days as a line of blue above the tree line, and on overcast days as a particular quality of light, and she had said that was enough. I had not changed the room since she died. 12 paintings on the walls, same positions. The piano had gathered a fine layer of dust on the keys that I had not been able to bring myself to wipe. This is her room, Julian said from the doorway. He wasn't stating a destination. He was stating a fact that had arrived with some weight behind it. Yes, I said. We went in. All of us, Frank and Hargrove, Dorothy, Julian, Clara, and Beatrice, and the particular silence that had been following us since the law office. Beatrice stopped inside the door. She looked at the paintings, all 12, all concert halls, and then at the piano. She had been in this room before. I watched her remember that. What are we here to see? Clara asked. The last item in Eleanor's estate, Frank said. Or more precisely, the item that was never in Eleanor's estate because it ceased to be estate property 18 months ago. He looked at me. Go ahead, Silas. I went to the first painting, Carnegie Hall. Eleanor painted it from memory in 1998. The perspective slightly compressed the way you remember places from below when you've stood on a stage and looked out. I lifted it from the wall. Behind the backing board, secured flat against the frame with a strip of archival tape, was a small velvet pouch. Deep green. The kind of green that says something is inside it that matters. Clara took a step forward. Dorothy stepped into the space between them without a word. Not dramatically. The way you step into a doorway when someone is about to walk through it who shouldn't. Clara stopped. I opened the pouch. Eleanor's mother's ring gold oval sapphire, the one that had sat in Eleanor's jewelry box as long as I'd known her. Her grandmother's pearl drop earrings, small and cream-colored, which I had seen her wear exactly once at a concert in Edinburgh in 1991. And a pair of diamond earrings, small, precise, mounted in white gold, that I had never seen her wear, not once in 40 years. I looked at them for a moment. Then I set them in Frank's hands and went to the second painting, Royal Albert Hall. The third, the Sydney Opera House, Vienna Concert House. The painting of the small recital room in Edinburgh she had never named, one by one, each one with its pouch, each pouch with its contents. Mon Grace, Eleanor executed this deed of gift 18 months ago. Frank said, setting each pouch aside as I worked, building a small line of them on the side table. He produced the document notarized, witnessed the February date visible at the top. I notarized it. Mrs. Gable witnessed it. 2 independent physicians evaluated Eleanor's cognitive status before and after the signing. Dr. Okafor's certification is attached as Appendix A. He set the document on the piano bench. These items transferred into Silas Sterling's personal ownership on February 12, 2023. They are not part of the estate. They were not subject to Eleanor's will. They were not subject to the trust, the covenant, or this proceeding. He looked at Beatrice first, then Clara. They were never available to contest. She couldn't have had adequate capacity to, Clara started. Page 11 of the attached documentation, Frank said pleasantly. Dr. Okafor's written evaluation dated the 12th notes. Patient demonstrates full orientation to person, place, time, and situation. Cognitive capacity to execute legal documents confirmed without qualification. He looked at Clara with the expression of a man who has run out of ways to be surprised. Do you want to challenge Dr. Okafor's clinical evaluation? In writing today, Clara looked at the document on the piano bench and said nothing. No objection noted, Hargrove said and wrote something. I came to the 7th painting. Paris, the Salle Pleyel, a small hall she had described once as her favorite on earth because of the quality of the silence before a piece begins. Behind it, 2 more pouches. I had not known there would be 2 behind this one. Silas, Julian said. His voice was careful the way it had been careful since the law office broke something open in him. Did you know about any of this? No, I said. He absorbed that. Did she tell you why she wouldn't let you sell them? She said she loved them. He looked at the wall where the 7th painting had been. Did you believe her? I always believed Eleanor, I said. I went through the 8th, 9th, 10th, each one. Dorothy kept a careful count in the small notebook she'd brought in. Hargrove documented each removal. Frank received each pouch and set it in its place. Beatrice watched. She hadn't spoken since the law office. She was recording. The same function she had always performed in rooms she needed information from, taking in, calculating, looking for angle. But the angles had been closing all morning one by one, and her face had begun to reflect the specific stillness of a room running out of exits. I went to the 11th, took it down, added the pouch to the line. The 12th was the Edinburgh Recital Hall. The smallest painting in the room, 30 centimeters by 40. A room where she had played a Schubert sonata at 23 to 40 people and called it the best night of her life. I had heard this story so many times I could have told it myself. I lifted it from the wall. The pouch behind it was heavier than the others. I didn't open it yet. I held it for a moment. Then I placed it with the others, 12 pouches arranged in a line on the side table. I stood there with the 12th painting in my hands, and the line of 12 velvet pouches in front of me in what had been Eleanor's room, while the ocean light came through the west window, and the piano gathered dust, and everything was very quiet. And she told me never to sell the paintings, I said. I always thought it was because she loved them. Frank looked at me across the room. She loved you more, he said. Nobody in the room said anything after that. Not for a moment. Julian had both hands on the piano frame. He was looking at the keys. Whatever he was feeling was moving through him in the particular way of something that won't be managed or summarized, just experienced until it's done. Dorothy set her pen down. Frank, she said quietly, I have the photographs in my bag. The ones Calloway will need. I know, Frank said. My phone vibrated. An unknown number. Text message. This is Detective Ray Calloway, Monterey County Sheriff's Department. Mr. Morrison suggested I be present this afternoon. I'm in your parking area. Mrs. Gable has something she'd like me to see. I read it twice. Mrs. Gable had said it the night after the funeral, standing in my kitchen in the rain. There was something I could do, and I did. I had not understood it then. I understood it now. We returned to the conference room in a different order than we'd left it. Some people walked in silence. One person moved with the particular control of someone who has been deciding for the last 6 minutes how to stand in a room where the ground has continued shifting without warning. Detective Ray Calloway was already there. He was sitting in the corner chair, not at the table, the position of a man who has learned the difference between a witness and the room's operating system. Late 40s, a gray suit that had been pressed once, and not again, a tablet computer face down on the table in front of him. He didn't introduce himself when we entered. He let everyone find their seats. Mr. Hargrove, Frank said, I'd like to introduce Detective Calloway, Monterey County Sheriff's Department Investigations Division. He's here as an observer at this stage. Noted, Hargrove said. Detective, Calloway nodded once. Mrs. Gable, Frank said, when you're ready. Dorothy set her bag on the table. She was the only person in the room who had not changed in affect or posture since this morning. Still the same economy of motion, the same applied focus. My camera has been positioned to face the Sterling property for 2 years and 4 months, she said. I installed it in December 2020 after I found the drafted letter in the trash. I noticed that Eleanor's condition seemed to vary significantly week to week in ways that didn't follow a consistent pattern. She paused for a moment. I've been an ER nurse. I know what consistent progressive decline looks like. This wasn't that, and I knew that something outside the disease itself was producing the variation. You observed this for 2 years and 4 months without reporting it? Hargrove asked. I observed it without having sufficient explanation for it, Dorothy said. Her tone was even. I'm not law enforcement. I documented what I could see. I reported it through the appropriate channel, which was here when it could be understood in context. Calloway moved the tablet to the center of the table and connected it to the room's display screen via a cable that had been set up in advance. "The footage I'm about to show was submitted to my office 48 hours ago," Calloway said, speaking for the first time. His voice was the flat, careful voice of a man who has learned to say nothing with inflection that he doesn't intend to say. "It has been entered into the chain of evidence. Duration 43 seconds. Timestamp: January 15th, 2022, 5:47 a.m. He pressed play. The footage was night vision quality. The green-gray of early morning from an exterior angle through a window with curtains not fully drawn. Eleanor's bedroom, a familiar room made unfamiliar by the angle and the hour. At 5:47:03, a figure entered the frame from the right. Beatrice in a dark sweater, moving with the unhurried deliberateness of someone performing a routine. She went directly to the medication tray on the nightstand, the one I had prepared the night before as I did every night, 6 tablets in sequence. She picked it up. She walked out of frame, in the direction of the bathroom. At 5:47:31, she returned, without the tray. She positioned it back on the nightstand, exactly as it had been. She left. 5:47:46. The clip ended. Nobody in the room spoke. The screen held the still frame of the empty bedroom for a moment before going dark. 19 documented instances. Calloway said, across a period from January 13th through May 20th, 2022. This is a representative clip. All 19 follow the same behavioral pattern. Dr. Okafor had been looking at her notes. She did not look up immediately. When she did, her face had the composed quality of a person who has just had a long question answered. January 2022, she said. That is precisely when the anomalous acceleration in Eleanor's decline began. 19 interruptions to a specific medication cycle, anticoagulants, combined with her primary cerebrovascular medication, would produce exactly the deterioration pattern I documented and could not account for using the standard disease model. She set her pen down. I could not explain it clinically. Now I can. Julian's voice came out low and stripped of everything that wasn't the words themselves. 19 mornings. He was looking at the screen. She drove to that house 19 mornings to make my mother worse. He turned to look at Beatrice. She had dementia. She was already dying. And you drove to that house 19 mornings to accelerate it. Beatrice sat with her hands in her lap and said nothing. Look at me, Julian said. She did not look at him. Calloway set a second file on the table. He opened it without ceremony. 3 weeks ago, following a formal request from Mr. Morrison, the Monterey County Medical Examiner's Office conducted supplementary toxicological analysis of archived blood samples from Eleanor Sterling's April 7th admission records. His voice was level at every syllable. Those samples identified elevated potassium chloride concentration, KCl, at a level consistent with iatrogenic administration. Not disease progression, not natural variation. Dr. Okafor had gone very still. KCl at the dosing level suggested, she said quietly, not to anyone in particular. Administered to a patient on the medication regimen Eleanor was on would produce cardiac arrest within minutes. It would not necessarily appear in a standard death report as anything other than cardiac event secondary to disease progression. A pause. Without full toxicological autopsy, it would not be found. There was no full toxicological autopsy, Calloway said. Standard protocol was expedited. We have been investigating the circumstances of that decision. An empty KCl vial was recovered from a separate residential trash collection, associated with Beatrice Sterling's home address. Forensic analysis identified fingerprints belonging to Beatrice Sterling. He looked at the table. And to Gerald Marsh. The room absorbed this. Gerald Marsh, Frank said, addressing Hargrove formally, appears to have leveraged his position as attending counsel in the initial estate proceedings prior to this hearing to apply pressure to the attending forensic pathologist to expedite the death review and waive deep autopsy. He looked at Calloway. For the record, I want to state clearly, Gerald Marsh is not in violation of professional ethics alone. He is based on the evidence presented this morning, an accomplice in an act of deliberate homicide carried out for financial gain. He paused. That is my professional assessment. Calloway stood. He moved to stand at Beatrice's side of the table. Ms. Sterling, I need you to stop speaking and listen carefully to what I'm about to say. His voice had changed, still flat, but now carrying the weight of something official. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Beatrice looked at him, then at the table. I want my attorney, she said. Mr. Marsh is currently in the parking area, Frank said very quietly across the table. Although I suspect at this point he has his own calls to make, Clara made a sound, not quite a word. She pressed her hand over her mouth. I sat with both hands open on the table and did not move. The man who had gripped an iron gate at a cemetery yesterday morning and felt the cold of it, he was still. He did not need to do anything further. It had been done. Calloway spoke quietly to a colleague by the door. Hargrove made several notes without speaking. Beatrice stood. Every person in the room tracked her, without meaning to the eyes finding the movement, the way eyes find anything that shifts in a room that has been very still. She looked at nothing. She walked to the door. Julian did not leave with the others. He sat back down in his chair after the room had partially cleared. He was looking at his phone, the same phone he'd been holding at the table since Calloway played the video. His hands were not fully steady. "Dad," he said. I looked at him. "I need you to see something." The room had emptied quietly. Hargrove had stepped out. Clara was in the hallway on a call that sounded like a person trying to reach someone who wasn't picking up. Frank was talking with Calloway by the door, their voices low and directed away from the table. Just Julian and me. And whatever was on his phone, he slid it across. The screen showed a text chain from an unsaved number. 6 exchanges starting April 4th. The last message was sent on the 13th yesterday. A name, Tanner. A confirmation of payment, $4,500 via wire transfer. A detail I recognized as soon as I read it, loose gravel section, Route 1 between Monterey and Carmel. Target vehicle 9 a.m. Thursday. I read it twice, set the phone down. She arranged the accident, I said. Yes, Julian said. To make me late to Eleanor's funeral. To keep you out long enough to give her the reason to lock the gate. He had been carrying this for 40 minutes, building up to sitting across from me with it. She needed you not to be there when the gate closed. She planned both. The room was very quiet. Hadn't Julian? I looked at him directly. I need you to be absolutely certain before either of us says another word. Con biet bo oi. Then in English, as if the Vietnamese came out without thinking. I know, Dad. I've been certain for 40 minutes. I've been trying to find the right way to say it to your face. Frank came back into the room. He looked at Julian, then at me, then at the phone on the table. He picked it up. He read for 8 seconds. This goes to Calloway, he said. Now before anything else. I know, Julian said. Do not forward it. Do not screenshot. Hand him the physical phone with the chain intact. Julian nodded. Frank set it back down and looked at me once, the look of a man who has reached the part of the work that belongs to someone else, then stepped out toward the corridor. Julian and I were alone again. He looked at the phone on the table between us, then at me. She built this for 3 years, he said. I didn't plan any of it. I want to be clear about that. I never agreed to any part of this. I didn't know about the certificate, the camera, the Coast account. I didn't know about any of it. He stopped, started again more carefully. But I watched her build something, and I kept telling myself it was complicated, that she had good reasons for things, that when it didn't feel right, I was being paranoid. He looked at the table. Looking away was easier than looking at what was there. I waited. "Why are you telling me this?" I said. He looked up. "Because you deserve to hear it from me, not from a transcript." I was quiet for a moment. "Do you know what I told your mother?" I said every time she asked why you hadn't come by. Julian said nothing. I told her you'd called that morning, that you'd asked after her, that work was difficult right now, but you were thinking of her. I looked at the table between us. Same table we'd been on opposite sides of all morning. I told her that every time. For 4 years. Julian's jaw tightened. "Why," he said quietly, "because the truth would have required both of us to admit something neither of us was ready to admit. And I had already made my decision about what to protect her from." I looked at him. See, I had Eleanor. I had her every morning and every evening and every appointment and every night when it was bad. I had what I needed. And she had me. So I lied to give her what she needed too. "You should have told me," Julian said. "You should have called me and told me what was happening." "Yes," I said. "I should have." He sat with that. "Would it have changed anything?" he said. "I don't know. That's not a question I can answer for you." Julian looked at the window. The afternoon light came in at an angle that put half the table in shadow and left the rest bright, and he sat right at that line, half in each. "She missed me," he said. It wasn't a question. "Every day," I said. She never said it out loud. She didn't need to. "Did she ever stop?" "No," I said. "She didn't." He closed his eyes for one moment. Opened them. He was not going to cry again in this room. He had made that decision somewhere in the last 60 seconds, and he was holding it. "What I need you to understand," I said, and I stood the chair sliding back on the floor quietly, "is not what Beatrice did. I need you to understand what it cost, what it costs every day, to love someone who is leaving and to keep showing up anyway, every appointment, every night, every morning, while the people who should have been there are not there." I straightened. "That's the bill, Julian, not the estate, not the house. That." He sat at the table and looked at me. He didn't have an answer for it. I hadn't given it to him to be answered. Frank's phone rang from the corridor. He stepped back into the doorway. Calloway. They traced the number from the messages. He looked at each of us in turn. "The individual's been taken in. They're asking for Silas's statement at the sheriff's station this evening." He glanced at Julian. "Likely yours as well." He held the door. "The afternoon is waiting for us." By 5:30, the statements were done, and the light had changed the specific amber of late afternoon in Carmel that makes everything look like it has been through something and survived, though the world will not say that directly. The steps outside the Monterey County Sheriff's Department faced west. I sat on the second step. Frank sat on the third. We had been inside for 4 hours. Calloway had walked us out. At the door he stopped, looked at me with the measured directness of a man who has spent his career in the exchange of difficult information and knows the difference between professional courtesy and the thing it sometimes becomes. "Mr. Sterling," he said, "what you helped build today, that evidence record, most people in your position don't get that. A lot of them never get anything." He paused. "Mon Eleanor was fortunate to have someone patient enough to do what you did." "She was the patient one," I said. He nodded once and went back inside. Frank set his briefcase flat on the step and let out a breath that had probably been in him since the morning. "Beatrice will be charged," he said. Elder abuse and criminal conspiracy at minimum. Those are guaranteed. The DA's office is reviewing the toxicology and accelerated decline evidence for additional charges. That review takes time, but based on what was submitted today, I expect it to move quickly. And Clara, I'm filing a fraudulent document in a legal proceeding under Penal Code 132. She was in the room. She handed it to Hargrove herself. Frank looked at the street. That doesn't go away quietly regardless of how good a lawyer she eventually finds. And Marsh, hired his own attorney at... Frank checked his watch. Approximately 2:17 this afternoon. That tells you what he thinks of his position. I said nothing for a moment. How long does all of this take? I said. The criminal proceedings 18 months minimum. Possibly 2 to 3 years through trial if either of them contests. He looked at me sideways. You'll be deposed. Called as a witness. The notebook, the recordings, the deed of gift, the medical log, all of it becomes formal testimony. I've had 2 years to prepare for it, I said. A few more months won't change anything. Frank looked at me the way he'd been looking at me since 1998. The look of a man who finds his clients more competent than they have any right to be and has given up being surprised by it. The deed of gift jewelry needs to be appraised, he said. Do that soon, before the estate proceedings formally close. I know a jeweler Eleanor trusted. She left me his card. Frank almost smiled. Of course she did. Julian finished his call at the far end of the steps. He walked over with the careful pace of a man who is not sure what his welcome is going to look like, and has decided to earn it rather than assume it. Independent counsel, he said. No prior connection to Beatrice or to Marsh or to anyone in that office, as you suggested, Frank. Good, I said. I'll make myself available. Everything I know, the account information, when she first told me about the trust fund, the names of anyone she mentioned. All of it. I know. He was quiet for a moment. The afternoon traffic moved on the road below us, unhurried in the way of Carmel, on any given Thursday, as if today had been a normal Thursday for everyone else. That's more than I deserve to hear, he said. Yes, I said, it is. I said it without hardness. But I also did not soften it or follow it with something that would let him off the hook he had placed himself on. I have spent 40 years as an engineer. I know that a structure either holds weight or it doesn't, and that saying otherwise doesn't change the load. He took it. That was something. Dad, he said, carefully. Leo, I wonder if sometime when things are less, I'd like to see him. If that's something you'd allow. I thought about a boy who had walked into a conference room this morning with a green plastic recorder and gone straight to the person he'd been told could help. Leo makes his own choices about who he trusts, I said. He did that today without anyone telling him to. Julian understood what that meant. He was quiet. My phone rang. Dorothy Gable. Is it over? She said. Getting there. Leo has eaten 2 sandwiches and used up all the puzzle pieces. He keeps asking if you're coming home. Tell him yes. How long? 40 minutes, I said. Maybe less. A pause. Silas. Her voice had something in it that wasn't quite saying anything. You did well today. My Eleanor did well, I said. Years ago, I just showed up. I ended the call. Frank was watching Julian walk down the steps toward the parking lot alone, without asking whether he could follow. The understanding implicit in that posture. He's not what she made him into, Frank said. No, I said. He isn't. That's going to matter when depositions start. I know. I stood, picked up my jacket. It's going to take a while. Yes, Frank said. These things do. I drove Route 1 north toward Carmel. The road was the same road it had been yesterday morning, when 2 cars and a patch of loose gravel and $4,500 had cost me the last 35 minutes I would ever have with Eleanor alive and above ground. The shoulder was clean, no marks. Nothing on the asphalt to say that anything had happened there, because the road didn't keep records of what it was used for. I drove past it at 50 miles an hour and looked at the ocean. The Pacific was the particular shade of gray-blue that only occurs at this hour on this stretch of coast, when the sun has dropped behind the hills but hasn't given up entirely. Eleanor had told me once that she loved this hour because it was the only time the ocean looked like it was listening. I kept driving. When I turned into Cypress Ridge, the porch light was already on. Leo was sitting on the front step next to Dorothy, still in his blazer from the morning tie, slightly more crooked than it had been. He raised his hand and waved the moment he saw my headlights freely, naturally, the wave of a child who has been waiting for someone he was certain was coming back. I sat in the car for one moment before getting out. This, I thought, was where the hard part began. Not the courtrooms or the depositions or the appraisals or the 18 months ahead. Not what was behind me. What was sitting on my front steps, waving, not yet knowing what anything meant, that was where the hard part actually lived. I opened the car door and went to meet it. Frank's office on the 22nd floor looked out over the bay and the bridge, the Transamerica building's particular gift to the people who worked there. Eleanor had mentioned the view once, years ago, after some meeting I hadn't been to. She'd said I stood at Frank's window and decided the city looked better from up here. That was the kind of thing she said in passing that I never forgot. I hadn't been to this office before. She hadn't told me that either. Frank had set the paperwork out in 2 stacks. The deed of gift transfer documents on the left, the foundation founding papers on the right. 3 weeks of appraisal had produced a single figure at the top of the first page, $347,000. 12 velvet pouches, 41 years of careful acquisition, hidden in the frames of 12 paintings she had loved. He sat across. He looked at the paper, then at me. You understand what you're signing? I do. You're declining to accept the jewelry as personal property. You're executing a transfer of the full appraised value, $347,000, into the foundation. You're declining to contest the estate distribution. That's correct. He set his pen down. You don't have to do this. Eleanor directed the house in trust to Julian and Clara. That was her decision. I don't override Eleanor's decisions. But even knowing everything they did, even knowing all of it, he picked up the pen again, turned it over. The house is a financial burden. The conservation bond is due in 39 days. The trust balance won't cover it. They'll either need to find outside capital or default on the covenant. He looked at me. They won't receive much, Silas. The estate they planned for doesn't exist. I know. And you're donating what you actually have. That was always Eleanor's money, I said. I knew where she kept it. That's the distinction. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the second stack of paperwork. Just Eleanor's foundation for music and memory. He read the name aloud evenly, the way you read something you want to hear in the air before deciding what to make of it. What does it do? Initially, home care grants. Families managing dementia patients who cannot afford professional nursing support. The research is clear. Caregiver isolation is one of the primary drivers of early institutionalization. If a family has a paid nurse for 16 hours a week, they keep the patient at home longer. The patient does better. The caregiver survives the process. I stopped. No caregiver should do what I did without support. If Eleanor's name attached to that fact prevents it for even a few families, that's the right use of what she left. Who runs it? Dr. Okafor has agreed to chair the medical advisory board. Dorothy will serve as patient services coordinator for the first year. I looked at the window. I'll serve as executive director, at least until it's stable enough to hire someone better. You've organized all of this in 3 weeks. I had 3 weeks, I said. I used the time. Frank looked at me the way he had been looking at me off and on since 1998. The expression of a man who thinks he knows what someone's capacity is and keeps being shown the measurement was wrong. He picked up his pen. This foundation, Eleanor would have had opinions about it. Many when I said, she would have argued about the name for 20 minutes straight. At least 20. Then she would have told me it was exactly right. She would have, Frank agreed. He signed. I signed. The foundation existed. My phone rang. Julian. Are you done? He said. Just finished. Was it what you expected? It was what it needed to be. A pause. He was somewhere that had background sound, a cafe maybe, or a waiting room. I've been in therapy for 3 weeks, he said. The therapist says I should be prepared to apologize to you every day until it stops feeling like enough to do. What did you say to that? Well, I said I don't know how many days that's going to take. Keep counting, I said. Yeah. A breath. Yeah, I know. A pause. How's Leo? He asks about me every day, according to Dorothy. He does the same thing on my end. Julian's voice had something in it I couldn't fully name, not quite grief, not quite relief. Something that was in the process of becoming one or the other. He still has the recorder. He put new batteries in it again. Apparently he's been carrying it to school. Tell him to keep it, I said. He'll like hearing that. I'm going to visit next week, I said. Tuesday, if that works with his school schedule. He doesn't have school Tuesday. Yes, that works. I ended the call. Frank was looking at the signed documents on his desk. He hadn't moved them yet. He was looking at them the way you look at something assembled from many pieces you have been carrying for a long time, now put together in a single place and taking up less space than you expected. Her arraignment is June 3rd, he said. You don't need to be there. I won't be. Clara's is scheduled the same week. 4th attorney on board as of last Tuesday. He began organizing the pages. She'll contest whatever she can find standing to contest. I know. The Conservation Covenant fight will take 3 years. Cost her more than the house was worth to fight. He clipped the documents together. Eleanor planned that with the patience of someone who had thought about exactly what these people were capable of. I stood. Frank gathered his jacket. He walked me to the elevator and pressed the button. We waited in the manner of people who have been doing difficult work together for a long time and no longer need to fill the space between the work and the leaving of it. The doors opened. Clara has hired her 4th attorney, Frank said. You said that already. I know. I say it twice because I want to enjoy it twice. He held the panel. She's planning to challenge the landmark designation. The standing is thin, the cost will be substantial. The timeline is... He almost allowed himself a smile. Extended. I stepped into the elevator. Eleanor had a very precise sense of irony for a concert pianist. She really did, Frank said. The doors closed. 1 year is a strange unit of time when you've lived what I have. Long enough to build something. Short enough that you still reach for a hand that isn't there. Gate 3 at Valley of Carmel Cemetery. The same gate was open when I arrived at 7 in the morning. No lock, no chain, no reason it couldn't be. I drove through without stopping. I had been stopped at this gate once. That felt right to remember today. The headstone had been placed in November. I had written the inscription myself, and Frank had asked me twice if I was certain, and I had told him the same thing both times. Eleanor Ann Sterling. She played as though the whole world was listening. I brought no flowers. Eleanor had always said flowers at graves were for the living, and she didn't intend to be one. I brought a thermos of coffee, and I sat down on the bench the cemetery had placed nearby, and I talked to her the way I had learned to talk to her in the last year, knowing she wouldn't answer, doing it anyway. Beatrice's trial is September 17th, I said. The DA's office added murder in the first degree last August, special circumstances under 1902.A. Financial gain, Frank says the evidence is as strong as he's seen outside a confession. The KCL vial, Marsh's testimony, Tanner's plea, the camera footage, the toxicology. I looked at the stone. They're asking for life without parole. Frank doesn't think they'll ask for the sentence, but the charge will hold. I drank the coffee. Gerald Marsh entered a plea agreement in October. Accessory after the fact, preparing false evidence, 2 counts of obstruction. He's looking at 8 to 12. He'll testify at trial. His attorney calls it cooperation. Frank has another word for it. I paused. I won't print the word here. The morning was the kind of Carmel morning that doesn't belong to any season cool. Still the fog not yet decided whether to clear. Skotika. Clara pled guilty in December. Fraud on the court, 1-count felony. Her real estate license was revoked permanently by the state. She's in Sarasota, Florida now. Her attorney negotiated community service instead of custodial time. She gave a brief statement to the DA about Beatrice's planning. In exchange. I looked at the headstone. I don't have feelings about it either direction. I just know. A beat. Tanner, the man on Route 1, pled guilty in May. He'll testify in September. He says Beatrice contacted him through Marsh. He says she gave very specific instructions about timing. I set the thermos down. The foundation received its first community grant last month. Monterey Bay Community Trust, $42,000 for the home nursing pilot program. Dr. Okafor is already running intake. We have 8 families in the first cohort. Dorothy is running coordination, and she is, as it turns out, considerably more organized than I am. I was quiet for a moment. Julian asked to join the board. I told him he'd have to actually show up. He said he knew. I said okay. I stayed another few minutes. I didn't say everything, there was no requirement to say everything. I just said what felt necessary to say to the one person who had planned it all and wasn't here to watch it land. I kept the Carnegie Hall painting, I said. I always will. By 2 in the afternoon, Julian's car was in the driveway. Before he'd fully turned off the engine, Leo had the door open. Grandpa. He landed on the path with both feet. I can ride without training wheels now. I've been able to do it for 6 weeks. Show me on, I said. For the next 40 minutes, he rode back and forth on the front path, confident in a way 7-year-olds are confident, which is entirely and without doubt, while Julian and I sat on the front steps and watched. We didn't need to talk. That was something that had happened over the last year. The space between us had stopped needing to be filled to be comfortable. He's been asking about you since last Tuesday, Julian said eventually. What did he ask? Whether you'd let him press the piano keys. He wants to hear what it sounds like. I looked at Leo making the turn at the path end. The piano needs tuning first. He won't care. I know, but I will. Julian almost smiled. He was still learning to do that, to let things land lightly. He was getting better at it. I had the first board meeting for the foundation scheduled for June, he said. Frank set it up. I confirmed my attendance the same day I received the notice. Good. I've been researching care models in 6 other states. Oregon has a program that's been running for 9 years. He was looking at Leo, not at me. I thought I could present it at the June meeting, if that's useful. It's useful, I said. I know it won't be. I know it's not enough. None of it is enough. No, I said. It isn't. But I'm going to keep doing it. Yes, I said. You are. Leo came back up the path on the bike, braked carefully, looked up at both of us. Did you see I barely wobbled? I saw, I said. You didn't wobble at all. He accepted this as his due and turned the bike back around. By 8, he had eaten dinner, watched 20 minutes of television. He wasn't meant to watch, and fallen deeply asleep on the sofa with his shoes still on. Julian carried him to the back room. He said goodnight. He said he'd call tomorrow. He went to his car without asking anything he didn't have the right to ask yet. I watched the car until I couldn't see the taillights anymore. The balcony faced the Pacific. I stood there as the dark finished settling, and the water became a sound rather than a sight. Beatrice's trial was 5 months away. The foundation had 8 families. Leo could ride a bicycle on his own. Julian was counting days, he hadn't told me how many, and I hadn't asked. The house smelled like sea salt and piano wax and something else. Something that had been absent for a long time and had returned without announcing itself. I stood in it and tried to name it. I couldn't. I let it be unnamed. There are things that lose their quality when you try to describe them precisely, and peace might be one of them. She had planned all of it. The diary with its 2 marked ribbons, the conservation covenant filed in July with no explanation. The deed of gift. On a February afternoon, while Beatrice and Clara were driving back down Route 1 thinking they had already won. The velvet pouches behind the frames she had told me never to sell. She had known in those 3 days in February, when she came back to herself, completely exactly what was approaching. And she had done everything that could be done so that when it arrived, I would be able to stand in it. She had been right. I went inside. I walked through the music room. 11 of the 12 frames were empty. I had donated the paintings to the foundation office 3 months ago. One remained. I stood in front of it. Carnegie Hall, 1987. Eleanor at 34 years old, standing at the piano in a blue dress I had never seen her wear in person, because I hadn't met her yet, in a hall full of people who had paid a great deal of money to be in the same room as her while she played. The painting was from memory, her memory of the angle from the stage, the particular weight of that audience's silence. I touched the frame. I did not take it down. I turned off the light. I went to sleep. Tomorrow would be another day. That was enough. That was finally enough. Looking back at this family story, I've asked myself what I should have done differently. The honest answer, not much. But the people around me, they could have done everything differently. I'm not a perfect man. I stayed silent when Julian needed me to push harder. I protected Eleanor from truths that might have changed what happened. If this grandpa stories, if this life of mine teaches you anything, let it be this: don't mistake patience for passivity. Don't mistake love for silence. And don't look the other way for 3 years and call it loyalty. Someone wiser than me once said that God doesn't call us to win. He calls us to be faithful. Eleanor was faithful to her music, to our marriage, to the truth she planted quietly behind 12 paintings. When she left, what remained was enough to stand on. That is my opinion, and I am certain of it. These kinds of grandpa stories rarely get told. Most family stories like this one stay buried with the person who lived it. They shouldn't. My advice: visit your parents. Not on holidays. On a random Tuesday. Call your grandparents before their number stops ringing. The people who love you quietly built everything you're standing on. Don't let them build it alone. If this family story moved you, if something in it felt familiar, leave a comment below. Tell me your story. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe that faithfulness matters more than winning, subscribe. There are more grandpa stories here that deserve to be told. Thank you for staying until the very last word. It means more than you know. A note. Before we continue, the stories ahead contain some dramatized elements crafted for reflection and understanding, not to mislead. If that's not the right fit for you today, step away with no judgment. Find what serves you best.